Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Oak presiding. Seated.
Ready for the jury? All right, go get the jury, Mr. Mullins. You may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Was everybody able to follow my instructions and admonitions over our lunch break?
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Rickers, you may resume. All right, so you're done?
I'm done. Yes.
Ms. Kraft, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
I want to start out by just going through, you had given a list on direct examination of the materials you reviewed in reaching your conclusions on this case.
Yes.
Can you please list those again?
Okay. I reviewed the Hilltop OBGYN records. I reviewed the Children's Hospital medical records, the Carlisle High School records. I reviewed the DNA report that confirmed parentage. I reviewed the sheriff or the police report that included the Trey Johnson interview. I reviewed the forensic anthropologist Elizabeth Murray's report dated September 6th, I believe. I reviewed the assistant coroner's report, Allen, dated September 19th. I reviewed the Dr. Latham, the Indianapolis forensic pathologist report that I believe was dated January 28th. I reviewed probably 5 or 6 times the transcript, which I had on a flash drive, of the July 14th and July 20th interviews of Detective Fain and Officer G the first time, and then Detective Fain and Detective Carter on the 20th, I believe I'm correct on that. I reviewed a email chain from September 27th, 2017 to September 28th between Prosecutor Knippen and Murray and Latham discussing the forensic anthropology report and the decision to consult Latham. I reviewed Mr. Levon's opinion. I feel like I'm leaving something out. That's all I can think of right now, but there may be something else.
You would agree you didn't include all of that in your reports, correct?
The Latham report, I can't remember. Oh, I also reviewed at some point Dr. Baker's, or Dr. Brady, excuse me, his report. I included what I thought was pertinent for the time that I wrote the reports. I wrote one report, and then I followed that up with another report.
Okay, you wrote a report on February 7th of 2018 and March 28th of 2018, correct?
That sounds right, yes.
And you would agree that all of the materials that you just listed are not included in both of these reports?
Certainly not all of the materials included. It was what I had at the time to review.
So this is what you had to review at the time when you wrote your reports?
That is what I had to review at the time of the reports.
So anything that you just listed that's not included in these reports you looked at after you reached your conclusions that you put in these reports?
Or I felt like they weren't pertinent to my opinion of the stillbirth delivery and didn't include it, or I reviewed it afterwards.
Okay, so the only thing, I want to be clear then, the only thing that was pertinent to your diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction and stillbirth are the things that you've listed in these two reports.
When I wrote each report, those were my opinions of the information I used at that time. Subsequent to those, and I can't really remember the time that I reviewed things, but other things kind of came about that I reviewed, and there was no need for me to change my opinion because my opinion stayed the same.
Okay. And you keep telling the jury, I reviewed her statements 5 or 6 times, correct?
Overall, from the time I initially received them, the first thing I think I received was not the entirety of the reports and the audio on flash drive, but I reviewed those, I would say, 5 or 6 times, and I'm speaking from the time the case was first filed until this morning.
Okay, well, doctor, I want to talk to you about what you based your opinion on in these 2 reports, okay?
Sure.
And in the second report, because your first report you authored without reviewing anything from either interview, is that correct?
That's my recollection, but I wouldn't state that for certain.
Well, do you have your reports up there still?
No, I do not.
Your Honor, may I approach? You would agree that in your February 7th report, it does not indicate in the materials reviewed that you looked at either one of the interviews?
Yes, I agree that. It's not in there.
Okay. And now I'm going to hand you your report dated March 28th of 2018. Can I have that one down, please? And what does it say you reviewed that time?
I have reviewed the supplemental discovery items recently submitted to me, including Dr. Brady's report and excerpts of the July 14th and 20 interrogations of Skylar Richardson, and also the obstetrical literature to come with my conclusions.
Doctor, can you please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when you authored this opinion on March 28th of 2018, what were the excerpts from the July 14th and July 20th interview that you reviewed?
They were focused mainly on her answers in the the July 14th interview, where she discussed approximately 20 times and described the baby not breathing, not moving, not opening its eyes. And then in the July 20th, there were some excerpts that talked about the baby being pale, and then some issues with did the baby gurgle or not gurgle and that type of thing. But specifically, I don't remember every excerpt that was given to me, and that's why when I subsequently met with Mr. Ritkers, he said, you need to review the entirety of the transcripts.
Because that would have been the right thing to do, correct?
Correct, and that's why I felt it was my duty and responsibility to make sure that I reviewed all of the transcripts and much of the audio, not much of the video, so that I could base my final opinion on the entirety of both interviews.
Because that was your duty and responsibility.
Correct.
But when you authored this report, you didn't comply with that duty and responsibility, did you?
Well, I didn't know that at that point he was going to have me do that, and was asked to file the report. And I don't know why at that point he hadn't given me the entirety of the transcript. I think when we had a meeting, I may have said, you know, do you want me to see the entirety of it? Because there was a lot of it that involved things like whether or not Annabelle was burned or not burned, or that didn't really apply specifically to what I was looking at, but he thought at that point that I ought to go ahead and look at the whole thing.
In case you were asked a specific question on
Correct.
cross-examination?
Correct.
So despite your duty and responsibility, because we just kind of talked around that a little bit, I want to make sure. When you authored your February 7th report, you had not reviewed any transcripts, correct?
If
That's
that's
your
what my
recollection.
report says.
And on March 28th, despite your duty and responsibility, you looked at excerpts that were selected by the defense.
Right. At that point, I was basing my opinion on the medical data that I had reviewed.
And I think I just caught something that you said, but I want to make sure we're clear. To this date, you still have not reviewed the entire audio or video.
No, I reviewed the entire audio, but not the entire video. I kind of looked at the video and felt like, you know, the more important thing other than the video was what was being said, and just to make sure I could get through it so that I can understand it. For me to read a written transcript, I can go a lot faster than I can follow an audio or a video in real time.
Doctor, you have today definitively said that you are diagnosing baby Richardson with intrauterine growth restriction, correct?
To a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
In this courtroom, that's what you're saying.
Yes.
You would agree, February 7th report, it was a likelihood, likely complicated.
Likely being greater than 50-50, more likely than not. And then as I continued my review, I'm prepared today to say that I believe it to be true to a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
Doctor, do you stand by the reports that you wrote?
Yes.
Okay.
Other than the changes that I made from one to the next, or anything that I said earlier today based on my subsequent review of the entire transcript that could vary somewhat. I think that's the normal evolution of trying to give an honest opinion so that the court can decide how the case is decided. So anything that I've reviewed up till now, I feel compelled to say, even if, and I don't think there's been a huge change in my opinion from my original opinion that I gave to Mr. Richardson today, but it has evolved somewhat just based on the information I have available to review.
And the additional material would be what Ms. Richardson said during her interviews?
The entire transcripts of the July 14th, and I can't remember exactly when I got Latham's report and reviewed it. I don't know if that's in there. That her report was given to the prosecutor's office on I believe about January 26, 28. So at that point I hadn't received it, at least by the initial one, and I can't remember for sure if I got that before the March one. And I didn't receive like the email chain for a while, and I don't remember if I included that in my two opinions that I first wrote.
Okay. But now you've gone from likely complicated to it's definitive, right?
To a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
And I want to be very clear, you yourself never examined Brooke Richardson, correct?
That's correct.
You never did any measurements of that child?
That's
the
correct.
Fetus, baby Richardson?
That's correct.
You never reviewed any ultrasound
That's correct.
of baby Richardson?
That's correct.
You never talked to Dr. Andrew?
That is correct.
So the information you have is from a review of the records and what the defendant has shared with you through her transcript.
And the other issue,
And
the other items
other
that we
documents.
discussed.
You have one measurement in this case, correct?
Excuse me?
One measurement in this entire case of baby Richardson.
One measurement of what?
You have one measurement in this entire case of baby Richardson.
One measurement of what?
Baby Richardson, the fetus, baby Richardson.
We have more than one measurement of.
You do.
We have the femur length, and we have the fundal height measurement of the mother that is reflective of the uterine size that baby Richardson was in.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. You are making this diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction based on standards that are not accepted within your own industry. Isn't that correct, doctor?
I'm basing my opinions on my evaluation of the entirety of the history,
Doctor?
the physical exam of the fundal height, the findings of the fundal height, and the course of her labor and delivery and her interviews, what I'm basing it on.
You have nothing to corroborate Dr. Andrews' measurement of 32 centimeters, is that correct?
Correct. I needed to rely on the records and all the information that I reviewed to make my opinion. And I tried to rely on all the information I had available, but I am limited
To that
on
one
what,
measurement
on,
during,
well, I'm limited to my ability to give you my opinion based on my evaluation of the entirety of the clinical situation.
but you just told these ladies and gentlemen you gave your opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, correct?
That is correct. That's what I was
But
able
it's
to.
a limited opinion.
To a reasonable degree of medical certainty I'm comfortable with stating that based on the information that I had to review.
During the life of baby Richardson, you had one measurement, correct?
I think, I'm just asking you to clarify what measurement. Are you referring to the fundal height?
During the life of baby Richardson, you had one measurement of the fundal height, which was approximately 32 centimeters.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I was just trying to make sure that you were speaking of the fundal height and not other measurements that were taken, because there were a lot of measurements taken at different times. But if you're speaking we had the forensic anthropologist, we had all kind of measurements
Doctor,
taken of bones.
Your Honor,
No, I was just trying to get your, I was just trying
Hold
to.
on, not talking to you, talking to me.
I'm asking him about how many measurements he had to base his opinion on during the life of baby Richardson. And he wants to keep talking about these other measurements that were taken
I
post.
think he's doing his best to answer your questions, Ms. Kraft. But if you could maybe specify what kind of measurements you're talking about, that might make it more clear for all of us.
Dr. White, prior to baby Richardson's death, how many measurements do we have in this case?
If you're referring specifically to the fundal height measurement, we had one fundal height measurement at 32 weeks. If you also, as a definition of measurement, you could be talking about weights, blood work, those are all measurements. That's just my confusion is trying to answer this as a physician.
Okay, well, do you have the weight of baby Richardson prior to May 5th, anywhere in your records?
There is no weight of baby
You
Richardson.
have blood work for baby Richardson prior to May 5th.
We have blood work from Skylar, but obviously no blood work from Annabelle.
So with regards to baby Richardson, prior to her death on May 7th, you would agree that we have one measurement that strictly relates to her.
Well, I disagree with that in the fact that we have a maternal weight measurement. We have other laboratory evidence that we can use to come up with a opinion, whether I could come up with an opinion.
So you're telling me you have the ability from Brooke Richardson's weight to tell me how much baby Richardson weighed?
I am able to assess that there is, to a degree of medical certainty, the stillbirth was due to intrauterine growth restriction, due to a constellation of findings, one of them being the fundal height measurement at 39 weeks.
You have a fundal height measurement at 39 weeks now.
I believe I stated earlier that when I looked at the police report and we were able to date the conception date, with the latest being August 7th, that her gestational age at the obstetrical visit on April 26th was 39 weeks and 2 days.
I don't want to work backwards because I want to try to get through some of these questions I have for you, but you would agree in both reports you never listed the police report as something you reviewed.
If I didn't, I didn't even know that information existed if I didn't list it. I thought actually in the second report, I think I did change that
Oh, you did,
to 39 to 42 weeks.
and we'll get there. If Dr. Andrew came into this courtroom and said that you need more than one fundal height measurement to make a diagnosis of IUGR, would you disagree with him?
If you had a 32 centimeter fundal height measurement with a known gestation of 39 weeks, you would start following that patient for intrauterine growth restriction.
You would agree at the time that Dr. Andrew saw Ms. Richardson, nobody knew when her conception date was because that information had not been provided by her.
That is correct.
Okay. So when you have no baseline to measure anything off of, and Dr. Andrew says you need more than one fundal height,
Well, I'm not-
do you disagree with him?
I'm not critical of all that he did not make that diagnosis because, that's all he had to go by. So his assumption that she was 32 weeks based on a measurement of 32 centimeters. So on April 26th, that was a very reasonable assumption that he made with his one fundal height measurement, that she was 32 weeks. And he stated that in his note that she was 32 weeks.
If Ms. Kraft asks you a yes or no question, she's
Okay,
entitled
sorry.
to a yes or no answer.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
If
Repeat your question.
it was if you would disagree with Dr. Andrew, that Dr. Andrew said he would have needed more than one fundal height measurement to make a definitive diagnosis.
On April 26th, yes.
Okay.
I agree with it.
You agree with him?
On April 26th.
And when Dr. Brady says that he agrees with Dr. Andrew that you need more than one measurement to make a diagnosis, more than one fundal height measurement to make a diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction, you then agree with him as well.
Unless you have a known gestational age at 39 weeks with a fundal height of 32 centimeters, with that information not being known on April 26th, I agree with that.
We've had a lot of testimony or questions asked in this courtroom about using a measuring tape for fundal height measurement. Why is that important to you?
Because that's how you need to measure the fundal height with a measuring tape.
And would you agree that using a measuring tape is more accurate than using your hands?
You cannot do a fundal height measurement without a measuring tape.
I'm not sure what you reviewed in this case because not everything is listed in here. When you were given additional materials to review, were you given the recorded interview between Dr. Andrew and law enforcement regarding the April 26th appointment?
I do not recall reviewing that.
You do not recall reviewing it. Would it have been helpful for you to hear that or would it have affected your opinion when you're relying upon this 32 centimeter measurement if it was not done with a measuring tape?
I would rely on the medical note.
You would rely on the medical note. And you would agree in this case the medical note does not indicate whether it was done with a measuring tape or hands.
It measured 32 centimeters, which cannot be done with your hands.
So you would have wanted to know then if in fact a measuring tape wasn't used, is that correct?
The assumption that all doctors would make if you
Dr. White?
No, I'm sorry.
Again, if Ms. Kraft asks you a yes or no question, she's entitled to a yes or no
Okay,
answer.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Would you have wanted to know if Dr. Andrew did not use a measuring tape before you based your opinion of intrauterine growth restriction on his measurement?
I can't answer that. It doesn't have a yes or no answer.
But you just said you can't do it with your hands, correct?
Yes.
And so if somebody does it with their hands, you would not want to rely on that, is that correct?
Object, Your Honor. There's no
Overruled.
testimony.
The objection is overruled.
It needs to be done with a tape measure.
And you were not given his recorded interview with the police officer to review when you were making a determination?
I was given his medical note, so no.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like permission to play the recorded interview, that excerpt, so that he can hear
Approach,
it.
please. All right, Ms. Kraft, you may resume your examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, if I represent to you that Dr. Andrew, who is the one that did the fundal height measurement of baby Richardson, represented to the investigators that he obtained that measurement by feeling her abdomen with his hand, no measuring tape, how does that impact your opinion?
It's just taken me a few seconds because I haven't thought of it. If we did not have a fundal height at 32 weeks,
Let me ask you this, doctor, is that something that you would have wanted to know?
well, I'm still working. I'm going to give you an answer in just a second.
Okay.
It certainly would have made me less certain of the diagnosis of IUGR. I still would have had suspicions based on the poor maternal weight gain, the lack of prenatal care, the weight that she was underweight when she came back to the doctor, and then I found out today, 5 days later. So I would have had less confidence in my medical degree of certainty, but it would have not changed my overall opinion that she delivered a approximately 40-week stillbirth at home that early morning.
So you still would have been confident making an opinion of IUGR on a technique that you just said a few minutes ago could not be done?
I'm unable to say with certainty my level of confidence, but I still would have been able to state with confidence that all the other findings were consistent with a stillbirth. IUGR would have been in my, what we call in medicine, my differential diagnosis.
But it might not have been the diagnosis
Might not
anymore?
have been the number one.
Okay. And fundal height, no matter how it's done, is just a screen, correct?
Correct.
It's not diagnostic, it's a screen.
It certainly helps key you into the diagnosis so you can follow with ultrasound.
So you can follow it, because you said on direct, after 24 weeks, you want to measure the fundal height at every single solitary appointment with a tape measure, correct?
That is correct.
And that's because you're going to start getting benchmarks, so you have something to measure against to see if this baby's growing, correct?
Well, you want to be, I wouldn't necessarily say benchmarks, because the benchmark is really the gestational age. You want to be sure that the growth curve is still continuing
to go
and
up.
it hasn't stopped growing.
You're aware in this case that nothing was done to corroborate that estimated fundal height?
Yes, I am.
There were no additional measurements.
Yes, I am aware of that.
There was no femur length taken.
Yes.
And you even
Correct.
said you need femur length in your first report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the reality is on April 26th, we have no idea how many weeks the baby Richardson was.
Exactly.
None.
Exactly. He had a 32 centimeter fundal height, and he estimated 32 weeks, but he didn't know with any certainty.
Because it's just a screen.
Well, in the absence of knowing the gestational age, it's not even a screen.
And at that time, nobody even knew the gestational age, correct?
That is correct.
So we have no idea what the gestational age is, you would agree, on April 26th?
On April 26th.
We have no accurate fundal height measurement if it's being done with his hand.
Correct.
And even if it's done with the hand or the measuring tape, you're aware that baby Richardson was already in the cephalic position on that date?
Yes.
And cephalic position means the head has now engaged, correct?
No.
You disagree with that as well?
Yes. The cephalic position has, am I allowed to clarify my answer?
If she asks you another question.
Are you aware that both Dr. Andrew and Dr. Brady said cephalic presentation would affect the measurement?
No.
You disagree with both of them on that?
Yes.
In your report, you indicated you looked at some relevant, pertinent literature was reviewed in order to reach your opinions, correct?
Correct.
And one of them was the Williams Obstetrics Textbook, Volume 17.
If I stated that, I did. That's been a while ago, and I haven't looked at it since.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I'm handing you your March 28th report. Again, can you look at your pertinent literature that you reviewed, please?
Okay, yes.
And that was one of the books that you looked at, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Ritgers asked you if you agreed with Dr. Brady when he said that the error rate after 30 weeks by relying on just a fundal height measurement is greater than 60%.
Correct.
You said you disagreed with that, correct?
Yes.
Doctor, do you see where it says uterine fundal height?
Yes.
Carefully performed serial, so that means more than one, correct?
Correct.
Uterine fundal height measurements throughout gestation are a simple, safe, inexpensive, and reasonably accurate screening, and they even have screening in italics, correct?
Yes.
Because it's not a diagnosis, it's not a diagnostic tool, it's a screening tool, correct?
Yes.
And that's when there's serial, more than one, correct?
That's what they state.
May be used to detect many small for gestational age fetuses. You would agree that's what the first sentence says, correct?
Yes.
The principal problem is the imprecision of such fundal height measurements. You agree that's what the next sentence says?
Yes.
And this is a book that you rely upon, correct?
Yes.
And then they cite a study, Jensen and Larson, correct?
Yes.
Symphysis to fundus measurements help to correctly identify only 40% of such infants. Thus, small for age infants were both overlooked and overdiagnosed. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that's what it says.
Well, this is a book that you rely upon, correct?
I do rely on the Williams Obstetrics book.
You listed it in your report, correct?
I do rely on this book, yes.
So you're not disagreeing with the book that you rely on, correct?
And you stop the reading of that paragraph.
Well, we can finish.
Would you like me to read it out loud, or would you?
Thus, small for age infants were both overlooked and overdiagnosed. However, these results do not contravene carefully performed fundal height measurements as a simple screening method that is used for supporting many, but not all, suspecting many, but not all instances of fetal growth retardation. 60% error rate, correct?
That's what the Jensen and Larson study said in 1991.
Is this the book that you rely upon or not, Doctor?
Along with everything else.
Along with everything else. You would agree, doctor, we have an unreliable measurement in this case. A
No.
hand measurement. We have a hand measurement, doctor.
I don't know that.
Well, if I represent to you that in his interview, he said that he used his hand, not a measuring tape, you would agree that we have a hand measurement.
No.
So now Dr. Andrews lying to the investigators?
I don't know. Dr. Andrews recorded 32 centimeters in his medical note.
You don't know how it was obtained. As you sit there today, you do not know how it was obtained, correct?
Correct.
And I'm asking you, if I represent to you, because you said you can't do fundal height measurement with a hand, if I represent to you that that is what Dr. Andrew told the investigators, that is how he came to that measurement, then according to you, that's not a reliable measurement, correct?
It's not a measurement at all.
We don't have any serial measurements in this case, correct?
Correct.
We don't have any serial ultrasounds.
Correct.
We don't have any femur length measurements at the time that baby Richardson was alive, correct?
Correct.
So your assumption that we have any leg, whether it's 3 centimeters, 5 centimeters, 7 centimeters, is based on nothing. There's no reliable measurement that you have in this case to base your opinion on that there is a leg in this baby's growth.
Can you, well, I didn't quite get your question.
You don't have a measurement if it was done by Dr. Brady's hand, correct? Or Dr. Andrews' hand, correct?
Correct.
You don't have any other fundal height measurements in this case, correct?
Just what's documented in the medical record.
Which you said if it's done by his hand, it doesn't count, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You don't have any serial ultrasounds.
That is correct.
You don't have any femur lengths
Other than the forensic anthropologist.
during the life of baby Richardson. I'm not talking about after baby Richardson died. I'm talking about when she was still alive and healthy in her mother's belly.
So the question is,
You
what
don't
was
have
the
a femur
femur
length measurement while baby Richardson was alive and healthy.
the femur length at the anthropologist report would be the same at the time of death.
You have no data from this case to make your diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction, do you, doctor?
If your assumptions are correct.
And if you have no measurement of this baby because it was done with Dr. Andrews' hand, you have no idea if there's any leg in this baby's growth, do you?
Other than the other risk factors, but it's less, I would be less sure of it.
Okay. You talked about other things on direct. One of the things that you tried or said that you took into consideration was the defendant's weights.
Yes.
Correct? I want to talk about that. You said that you reviewed a sports physical, and I wrote this down because I don't know if you got the date wrong or if you were referring to something other than what was listed in your report, that you looked at a sports physical from September 13th.
I misspoke. It was July 16th, 2016. I think I said September and corrected it. But the sports physical was done July 13th, 2016.
And that was a weight of 134 pounds, correct?
Yes.
You're aware, you testified, you know that Ms. Richardson has an eating disorder, correct?
Yes.
You have nothing in any of the records that you reviewed to tell you what her weight was in August of 2016, is that correct?
Correct.
September of 2016,
Correct.
October of 2016,
Correct.
November of 2016,
Correct.
December of 2016.
Correct.
You don't have another weight until we get to April 26th, correct?
Correct.
The defense has shown a lot of pictures in this courtroom of her weight going up and down. During the 9-month period that that baby was inside of her, you have no information as to what her weight was, correct?
When we calculate maternal weight gain, we use the pre-pregnancy weight and the weight at delivery, or in this case, the closest to delivery 11 days prior. But no, we don't know what she did during.
No idea. You don't know if her weight was up, you don't know if it was down, correct?
Correct.
You don't know how much it fluctuated?
Correct.
I mean, we've seen pictures where in 6 months she managed to take off 30 or 40 pounds.
Correct.
You have none of that for this 9-month period.
Correct.
You have a weight in July of 2016, mid-July of 2016, and you have a weight in April of 2017.
Correct.
You don't know what, if anything, she was doing to her body as far as taking laxatives to hide her pregnancy weight, correct?
Correct.
You don't know how much she was or wasn't exercising.
Correct.
You don't know how much she was or wasn't eating.
Correct.
So you don't know what her weight gain was. Is that correct?
I know what her maternal weight gain was.
And that's assuming that she did nothing during that 9 months to alter her weight. You don't know if it went up and then she went down, if it was getting to be too much, so she quit eating. You don't know any of that, do you?
No.
So we really don't know how much weight she put on throughout the course of the pregnancy,
We know a maternal weight gain of 15 pounds.
based on a July 13th date and an April 26th date.
Correct.
But you don't know what happened in that intervening 9 months.
I do not know how the spikes went.
Now, in your first report, February 7th, your first report. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Actually, I'll just put it up here for you. Can you read your second statement that you put in your report?
Therefore, based on the above, Ms. Richardson's due date would have been on or about May 14th, 2017. This would place her likely conception date around August 21st, 2016.
That's not what you testified to today, is it?
Correct.
And the only thing that you had after this report were her excerpts from the interview before you wrote the second report.
I'm not sure, based on that, when I got the interview with the police and the father of the baby, where he said when they had sex.
Doctor, in your first report, you reviewed the Hilltop OBGYN records, correct?
Correct.
The Children's Hospital medical records, correct?
Correct.
The medical records from Miss Lori Dunham, correct?
Correct.
Carlisle High School records, including health physical records.
Correct.
That's the sports physical you're referring to,
Correct.
correct? Medical records from Cincinnati Center for Wellbeing, correct?
Correct.
Report of Kent Hirschbarger and autopsy report of Dr. Allen, correct?
Correct.
Report of Elizabeth Murray.
Correct.
And you came up with August 21st,
Correct.
which is almost a month later than what you're saying today, correct? At least 3 weeks off.
It's, well, no, I believe it's 2 weeks difference. I believe that report says I estimated her due date at May 14th, and I believe my earlier testimony said the window was that her latest date of conception would have been August 7th, which places her due date at May 1st. So there'd be 14 days difference.
But you initially said August 21st, correct?
As a conception date.
As a conception date. And today, on the witness stand, you said late July or early August.
With the latest date being August 7th, which again is 14 days difference.
Okay. So were you 2 weeks off then or 2 weeks off now?
Well, in my opinion, I was 2 weeks off then.
Okay. And this is based on a statement that was contained in the police report?
That opinion of mine was based on Elizabeth Murray's forensic anthropology result, that where she measured all the bones, she measured a lot of bones, and got a lot of different measurements, and they were all consistent, 38 to 40 weeks. But the one that I utilized is because the one its obstetricians utilized the most, and we deem as the most accurate, was a femur length. And the femur length was 38 to 40 weeks, so average 39 weeks. That's how I came up with that date.
That's how you came up with the August 21st.
As the conception date for a due date of May 14th.
And you're not aware of what other witnesses have testified to in this case, correct?
No.
Okay. So if the forensic anthropologist said that based on all of the bone measurements, baby Richardson was 38 to 40 weeks, you agree with that based on the information that's been provided to you?
That's the size of the fetus at death, yes.
And based on that information, you came up with the August 21st conception date?
Correct.
People don't always give you accurate information, correct?
Correct.
You would rely on this though, wouldn't you?
And that's why I did,
And that's how you came up with the August 21st date?
originally.
Okay. Are you aware that in this case, the father of the child testified and said that they did not have sexual relationships until well into August?
No.
Are you aware that Ms. Richardson sent her boyfriend a text and said their relationship wasn't until August?
No, I don't have that information.
You weren't given that to review either?
No.
So this conception period that starts into July, you're now aware they weren't even together at that time?
I guess if that's the truth, it wasn't in July, it wasn't in July.
Well, doctor, again, when you testified on direct, the conception date was one of the things you used to reach your opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty.
Correct.
So now you know that you don't have an accurate conception date, correct?
If I don't have a possible conception date of August 7th, based on the police interview with Mr. Johnson, I believe I have his name, if that police report is not accurate, then my most accurate data point will go back to the femur length, which would place Annabelle at time of her death at 39 weeks and not 41.
And that conception date in your original report, before you changed it, of August 21st, is consistent with what Trey Johnson testified to and consistent with what she texted to Brandon.
I accept your word for that.
Thank you. Now you said, and the defense used a side-by-side photo, that one of the things you also took into consideration were photographs. You even talked about that in your March 28th report, correct?
Correct.
that you were presented with photographs, and we've seen it a couple times now, when she bought the dress and when she went to prom, those side-by-sides.
Correct.
And based on those side-by-sides, you again think that there wasn't sufficient weight gain?
It was concerning to me when I saw those photos.
What do you see depicted in that photograph, doctor?
Skylar in her red prom dress next to a gentleman whose face is cut off in a suit in front of their mantle. And this appearance looks like it's on her prom night and looks very similar to the photo I looked at before.
Okay. Do you know what a corseted dress is?
No.
Do you know what a corset is?
I think I have an idea. Yeah.
What do you think it is, doctor?
A corset?
Mhm.
It's like a girdle.
You can tighten it up, or you can loosen it up, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that the back of that is a corset?
No.
That is a corseted dress? And so you can tighten it up to make
Okay.
sure it fits nice and snug,
Okay.
and you can loosen it up to accommodate weight gain. Are you aware of that?
I probably should be, having 2 daughters and a wife, but no.
Okay. So you don't know how much she loosened up the back of that dress from February to May, do you?
No, I just see the
Just the front of the
straight-on
dress.
appearance of what it looks like to me.
Again, you said on direct you took into consideration her blood work. And you disagreed with Dr. Brady that there were no nutritional concerns indicated on her blood work because of an RDW level.
Correct.
And that now, today, you find that interesting, correct?
Yes, I find it interesting.
Okay. If we go all the way back to February 7th, you had the Hilltop records, correct?
Correct.
And you had them when you did the March 28th report as well then, correct?
Correct.
Never mentioned that number in either one of these reports that caused you any concern, did you?
Correct. I admit I didn't even notice it till the last week myself.
When you reviewed Dr. Andrews' records and even Dr. Boyce's in July of 2017, are you aware that both of them indicated that she appeared well-nourished?
I'm aware of that said that, yes.
Okay. And you have no reason to discount their assessment of her
No.
nourishment at that time?
No.
And Dr. Andrew had the blood work. Didn't
Correct.
cause any red flags for him, correct? And you've indicated that you never talked to Dr. Andrew when you looked at this case, correct?
Correct.
He's the only person in this case that treated her while she was pregnant,
Correct.
that performed an ultrasound,
Correct.
felt her abdomen.
Correct.
Did you see anywhere in the record that he had any concerns about intrauterine growth restriction 2 weeks prior to that baby's birth?
No.
Did you see any indication that that baby had any dysmorphic features on ultrasound?
No.
Did you see any indication that there was a concern about a decrease in amniotic fluids on the ultrasound?
No.
Baby had a strong heartbeat, and even you indicated at 140 beats per minute that baby's alive, correct?
Correct.
And that's 11 days prior to her birth.
Correct.
Are you aware that Dr. Andrews said he had no reason to believe that she wasn't delivering a healthy, viable baby?
I'm sorry, that question again?
He had no reason to
Was the
believe
question, was I aware of that, that he said that?
that based on his one assessment, because that's all she went in for, he had no concerns.
I just misunderstood. I didn't hear your question. Did you say, did
Are
I?
you aware that he had no concerns about the viability of that baby?
No, I'm not. I wasn't aware of what his concerns or no concerns were.
Are you aware that his only concern was her presentation and insistence that she couldn't have a baby and no one could know?
No, I don't know what his concerns were. I know they were trying to reach her to come back for a prenatal appointment.
Would you have wanted to know that?
No, I understand his reasoning for wanting to get her back for a prenatal visit, and I understand his concern about the unplanned pregnancy. I have total empathy for where he found himself to be on April 26th.
I mean, let's talk about that, doctor. If a girl came into your office and you believed her to be into her third trimester, and she's telling you, I cannot have this baby, I'm going to college in the fall, I cannot have her, would that start to cause you a little bit of concern?
Well, yes, it does, and I've counseled women, and I've served on as board chairman on organizations, and I've had to make referrals to abortion centers. I've seen all of that in my career, and yes, it's concerning.
And saying you can't tell anybody, nobody can know about this baby. Is that concerning?
That, in my experience, is a very common interaction in what we term crisis pregnancies, unplanned pregnancies.
Doctor, have you ever been so concerned that you felt it necessary to give suicide warnings?
In medicine overall, in my 30 years?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And when you give
Absolutely.
suicide warnings, what's your concern?
If we try to ask the question, are you thinking about harming yourself or harming others? And that would be a situation where HIPAA no longer applies.
Because at that point, you want to make sure that that healthy, viable fetus is not going to be harmed, correct?
Or the mother's not going to kill herself, which
Or the
happens.
mother's not going to kill herself.
Correct.
So for you to give suicide warnings, there's got to be a pretty significant concern.
So if you mean alerting the authorities or alerting someone to potential
One
suicide?
question at a time. If you give your patient suicide warnings, you're pretty concerned at that point, aren't you?
I'm missing what you mean by suicide warning.
Well, have you ever given a patient suicide warnings, caution them about hurting themselves and or the baby?
Yes.
And were your concerns pretty heightened at that point?
If my assessment was that they were a suicide risk, I would not stop with telling the patient, don't go out and kill yourself. I would either alert the authorities or alert the family member that this was an acute emergency and that person need to be admitted to the hospital, and I have done that.
Because you felt there was a risk to the mother or to the baby?
Correct.
Because you don't give everybody that walks into your office suicide warnings, correct?
Well, if we have someone who comes in with postpartum depression or any situation like this, or a crisis pregnancy, we try to ferret out what the suicide risk is and act accordingly.
Doctor, you keep using this term crisis pregnancy. What do you mean when you say a crisis pregnancy?
A crisis pregnancy is a pregnancy that is unplanned, unwanted, and they don't know what to do about it. And they don't know, in a crisis, they will often say, I can't have this baby. Sometimes it's her parents, sometimes it's her husband, sometimes it's her boyfriend. Somebody's going to harm me. I can't be pregnant. And then it's up to the obstetrician and our social network to decide what to do about that. That's a crisis pregnancy.
And you would agree that based on her presentation, she fit that criteria, correct?
If that was Dr. Andrews' assessment, I accept his assessment. I didn't see where they did those steps I mentioned.
You're aware in this case, because this is how we got here, that her reaction on April 26th, coupled with the fact that we no longer have a baby after him believing there were no health concerns with that baby, he made the decision to notify the police?
My understanding is by Ohio law, it wouldn't have mattered what she would have said. If someone comes in and they're pregnant and then they don't have a baby, you notify someone that there's a baby somewhere.
That's not normal for babies to just disappear, correct?
That is not normal.
Now, doctor, from this intrauterine growth restriction diagnosis that you previously said was definitive, from there you then made the leap to say that we now have a stillborn child, correct?
Correct.
You were not there the evening of May 7th, were you?
Correct.
You are dependent now, because that's where what's changed in your report from February 7th, it was likely, and then in March 28th, after you reviewed certain excerpts from her interviews, now we definitively have a stillborn child, correct?
To a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
In your report, one of the things that you talked about in trying to come up with this diagnosis of stillbirth was there was no apparent gush of fluid. And so from that, because she didn't say there was an apparent gush or leakage of fluid, you determined that there was no breaking of the water, or there wasn't significant amniotic fluid. Is that correct?
That's the crux of it, that there wasn't much amniotic fluid when she delivered.
Which transcript did that come from?
I believe I remembered in the Carter, the 20th, that there wasn't a gush.
There wasn't a gush. Do you know where that was in the second transcript?
My notes would have it, I can't remember.
Okay. This is the first transcript where she was questioned about her water breaking or any amniotic fluid. And this is on page 16. Lieutenant Payne says, do you know, have you ever heard the term when people say their water broke? And Skylar says, yeah, I don't think. I don't know if that. You didn't feel that? I don't know.
Are you able to scroll down?
Sure.
So
Well,
it's
you would.
it's not on this page, but I remember reading, and I can't remember the page number, like I said, it'd probably be in my notes, that there wasn't a gush.
There wasn't a gush? But you don't know where that was in the interview where she said no gush?
Long interview, even with reading it a lot, I can't remember.
but you specifically recall seeing or reading her saying there was no gush.
To the best of my recollection.
Because you would agree, when she's asked about it here, she doesn't know.
Yes, she says, I don't think.
I don't know. I don't think, I don't know, I don't know.
She says, I don't think, I don't know if that, and then she was interrupted. But you didn't feel it, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. So you think you got that from the second interview, but you're not sure
Yeah, I'm not.
where you would have come up with
As I
that?
sit here right now, I'm not sure where I remember that from.
You talked about one of the other things that you considered was the fact that she had a relatively short labor, correct?
Correct.
How did you come up with the conclusion, doctor, that she had a relatively short labor?
Well, based on that she did not know she was in labor, and then she went into the bathroom and had the baby. But that's actually recently been called into some question because of, and I haven't really seen it, but I've heard that she may have been complaining of cramping at the Reds game and earlier that day. So I don't know if she had a short overall labor, but what I do know is that she had one push and the baby just plopped out. So that part of her labor was very short. But the overall labor, what we commonly call the first stage of labor, was time. At this point, all I can say was time indeterminate.
So can we disregard that then when you say she had a relatively short labor?
We can, yes, we'll disregard. I don't know what she had on a relatively short labor. All I know is that she went to the bathroom, pushed the baby out on the toilet, it plopped out in a very short fashion.
And that's one of the excerpts that you were provided?
I believe I was, and I've reviewed it subsequently. I can't recall where it is in the first or second opinion, if I mentioned that.
But if you have now heard that she started having cramps the evening of May 5th,
She may or may not have been in labor. It's hard for me to determine.
and that come the morning of May 6th and throughout the day, she was laying on a heating pad because the pain was getting more intense.
She may have been in labor. And obviously, since it resulted in delivery, may very well have been in labor.
And if her boyfriend provided testimony that she was squeezing his hand and he was trying to rub her back to help with some of the cramping, getting
Then
that back pain's consistent, correct?
that would be further evidence that she was in labor at that time.
And if she says the pain was in her back and it was piercing, we're transitioning along here, aren't we, to
Sounds
labor?
like it.
And if that started as early as the evening of May 5th, you have no reason to discount that, correct?
No.
You also made a statement that, in your report, that this short labor, which now is no longer short, was probably very easy because, again, we have a growth-restricted baby because of the small size of the baby, correct?
And the stillbirth.
But you talked about the small size of the baby, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. As we sit here today, you have no idea what size that baby was when she came out of Miss Richardson, do you?
Other than I maintain my opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, it had IUGR and growth restriction and was stillbirth.
So you assume that the baby was small at delivery?
Yes.
Okay. From the review of materials that you've looked at for preparation in this case, are you aware that Miss Richardson worked at Child Watch?
Yeah, I think I did see
Daycare?
that, yes. Mhm.
Okay. And we saw a lot of pictures today. She likes kids. Would you accept that as true?
I accept that as true.
She spends time with kids. She spends time with babies at work. You accept that as true?
I accept that as true.
I think at one point it was even said babies as young as 6 weeks she has experience with. Do you accept that as true?
I accept that as true.
you would agree that the only person, not just in this courtroom, but in this world, that has ever laid eyes on baby Richardson is the defendant.
That is true.
And she has experience with babies, right?
That is true.
In the second transcript on page 27, can you read line 10 to me? Skylar's description of her baby.
She was kind of big.
That's not small, is it?
I don't know what that means.
But she does, because she works with babies,
I-
correct?
I have no idea.
But did you review that part of it? Was that one of the excerpts?
I don't know where that was. I did read that, and I didn't think she would be able to assess, after 30 years of delivering a baby, I can hold them up and guess within a half a pound, but I wouldn't expect her to be able to guess the birth weight based on what the baby looked like.
Well, she didn't give a description of a small baby, did she?
That speaks for itself.
Thank you. Now, you didn't testify much about this today, but in your report, you talked about this mammalian gag reflex, correct?
Incorrect.
You did not?
I believe it was a mammalian dive reflex.
Mammalian dive reflex. You talked about that in your report.
Correct.
And you said that there's no way this baby could have gurgled because she was dropped out into a toilet, right?
2 reasons they're not going to gurgle.
Go ahead.
Underwater. One is the mammalian dive reflex. If they go underwater, they're not going to breathe until they come out. And number 2, they have no air in their lungs to blow out and gurgle yet. There is no air in the lungs when the baby's in utero. So if the baby's born alive underwater, it's not going to gurgle. That was my rationale. Those 2 things.
Okay, well, we're going to go back to what you reviewed then. Doctor, what are you basing your statement on if the baby's born alive underwater?
I believe Carter asked her, did she hear the baby cry? And I believe Skylar said when she was in the toilet, she may have heard a gurgle.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not think that that was consistent with anything I've ever seen in 30 years where a baby gurgles upon its birth.
Okay, let me ask you a couple questions about that, okay? Where in either of the transcripts did it say the baby was underwater?
It was in the toilet. It was said they heard a gurgle. And my position was, A, had it been underwater, it would not gurgle because it wouldn't have breathed. And B, babies do not gurgle. They startle, they take a big breath in and start screaming.
Doctor, where in either of the transcripts did you read that the baby's head was underwater?
I didn't read specifically. I read the comment on gurgle and made 2 assumptions why that was unlikely to be true.
And both of those assumptions assume the baby's head was underwater.
No. The second assumption was that the baby would not have gurgled to start the transitioning to extrauterine life, because babies do not gurgle. They take a gasp in, they scream.
Were you provided the excerpt in the first interview where she said when the baby came out, she caught her head? She catches her head as she's coming out?
I believe it said she tried to catch it, but it happened too fast and it went down into the toilet.
Your Honor, may I approach? line 12, I kind of caught her by the head a little bit. Do you see anywhere after that where it says she went down into the toilet?
There's another interaction where they talk about the baby being really slippery and fell into the toilet and stayed there for 2 minutes.
Doctor, I want to show you where they're talking about that in the second interview on page 19. Was her head part under the water? I don't think, no. Where does it say that her head went under the water?
When I was looking at it, Carter asked the question, were there bubbles or anything? Sometimes there's like bubbles. That meant that line of questioning was trying to determine if Annabelle was underwater. And it may have gurgled. And the questioning was, did this baby gurgle or not gurgle? And so my argument was that A, had it been underwater, and we don't know because we weren't there, had it
Correct.
been underwater, it wouldn't have gurgled because they don't gurgle underwater due to the mammalian dive reflex. And 2, it wouldn't have gurgled because that's not what babies do when they're born.
So the fact that she used the word gurgle, she didn't pick the right word, is that what you're saying?
Well, that word was prompted by the detective. She followed up and said gurgled, and my opinion was the baby didn't gurgle.
And she's told us the baby's head didn't go underwater, correct? 2 times.
She said she tried to grab the baby slipped into the toilet, and she may have heard a gurgle.
That's different than you saying she said her head went underwater.
I don't know if I wasn't there. I don't know if the head was underwater. I'm saying the baby didn't gurgle.
I understand that, doctor, but you would agree, you just said in the interview transcript it said her head went underwater. Do you recall reading that?
I thought I thought you said she grabbed it by the head, and I said she tried to grab it by the head and it slipped into the toilet, and there was a question if the head was underwater, and she thought upon questioning, she thought she may have heard a gurgle, and my point was, I did not think it would be reasonable that she would hear a gurgle, because had it been underwater, it wouldn't have gurgled due to the mammalian dive reflex, and 2, babies don't gurgle.
Doctor, what if the baby wasn't born in the toilet?
Then that's an unknown. We don't know how that would have changed. It would have still been stillbirth if it had been on the floor.
Very early in on your direct questioning, Mr. Rickers asked you your opinion in this case, and you said, yes, I have an opinion. Indeed, on May 7th, she delivered a stillbirth infant in the bathroom.
Correct.
What if that baby was not born in the bathroom or in the toilet?
Then it would not have been delivered in the bathroom or the toilet.
Would you have wanted to know that before you wrote a whole paragraph about the mammalian dive reflex?
That was due to answer the question in my mind of did she hear a gurgle, which was used by some to say that was a sign of life. And what I was saying is I don't think that gurgle can be used as a sign of life. That was my point.
Gotcha. Would it be safe to assume if you did not review Dr. Andrews' recorded interview to the police, you also didn't review Dr. Boyce's recorded interview to the police?
Correct.
Are you aware that Dr. Boyce, well, I'm sure you're aware from the review of the records that Ms. Richardson met with Dr. Boyce. She had her appointment with her before the investigation started, correct?
On July 12th.
You're aware of that?
Yes.
So before she's ever questioned by any police officer, you're aware that she told, or are you aware, I guess is the proper question, that she told Dr. Boyce that the baby was born in the bedroom?
I don't remember if that was in the medical note that I reviewed. I just remember her telling Dr. Boyce that she delivered a stillbirth at home and then buried it in the backyard. But I don't remember, it could be there, I don't want to argue, but it may or may not be there. I don't remember seeing bedroom.
And you don't recall watching Dr. Boyce's interview and hearing her tell the police that that's what happened?
No, I didn't see that.
Okay, you didn't see that. When the defense gave you excerpts to review, did they give you any excerpts where she talked about indications of a live-born baby?
I believe there were the experts, the comments from the 20th interview. There were comments she made of maybe saw a movement, maybe saw a gurgle, maybe saw the chest move. I did have those when I first evaluated, and then got the full, like I said, got the full transcript later.
Okay. So you were provided with excerpts about the baby moving?
From
Gurgling.
the 20th interview, yes.
Gurgling, but
I've
you
had
don't-
all that, yeah, I've been able to.
You've seen that?
Mhm.
You've disregarded all of those, correct?
I wouldn't say necessarily disregard, I weighed them against the 14th interview and what she said early in the 20th interview when she says she didn't feel movement and came out very pale and she didn't think it was alive. And then I grant you later on in that 20th interview, there were some suggestions that maybe she saw a movement or saw a gurgle or heard a gurgle.
Movement, that was irrelevant to you?
It wasn't irrelevant. I had to weigh it all. I had to weigh it to come up with a conclusion of, was my medical opinion that this baby was born stillbirth, which means no sign of life, was that a valid opinion? And I used all of that information to come to a conclusion.
You would agree that crying, gurgling, moving limbs, those are all signs of life, doctor?
Yes,
Those are not indicative of a stillborn child?
yes.
Mr. Kraft, I apologize for interrupting. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to take our afternoon break. Remember the things that I previously told you. Do not begin to think about how this case should be decided, nor begin discussing the case amongst yourselves. We'll see everybody back here at 20 after. You may be seated. We are on the record outside the presence of the jury. Anything from the state? Anything from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right, we'll see everybody at 20 after.